Hello, this is Tom Capshew, and you're listening to my Consciousness Rising YouTube channel. Today we're going to look at episode 17, and we're going to look at your life experiences. Do your life experiences define you, or do your life experiences refine you? This is an important question. And to get there, we've got to recognize that we all have had life experiences that are positive and are negative. None of us as humans are able to live our life with only positive experiences. Life just doesn't happen that way. There are experiences that you catch your breath when you have that experience. It's almost an inhalation, and those experiences often contract you and restrict you and limit you. And we all have life experiences that help us to give out a sigh of relief. That feels good. Those experiences are usually positive and they expand you. Just like breathing, we have to inhale and we have to exhale to stay alive. We can't do one or the other. But oftentimes what happens is that life experiences, when they are ones that you catch your breath, or you're surprised by, or you're driven to fear by, will end up restricting you, at least temporarily. And some of us are restricted permanently, because what we've done is we've decided that those experiences define us. They become part of our identity. So I'd like to look at how we go from a place of letting experiences become our identity to letting experiences become an important lesson that helps us to get clearer about who we are and what skills we bring into the world. So let's talk about three types of experiences that end up constricting or restricting us in our lifetime. We'll start with early experiences. There's a great study that was done several years ago now called the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, or the ACEs. I'll put a link to more information about ACEs in the description. But ACEs looked at what kind of experiences happened in a child's life that ended up having long-term or lifetime consequences. So they looked at the rate of different types of experiences and whether that increased risk factors for negative lifetime patterns. So things like early teenage pregnancy, substance use, domestic violence, criminal activity, and they looked at, do those adverse childhood experiences increase the likelihood of negative outcomes as adults? And not surprisingly, it did. And so the first category of life experiences that may define or refine you depending on your reaction or your way of working through it are things that happen in our childhood. So let me give you an example. When I was an early teen, my mother became addicted to alcohol. She spent a few of her years drinking excessively, and it was a very trying time and sad time for me. We finally got her into treatment at Hazleton in Minneapolis, or in Minnesota, and she came back from that treatment alcohol-free and remained alcohol-free for the rest of her life. That experience, that life experience, affected me profoundly. It provided for me a deep respect for the use of substances and how they can overtake your life. And for a while, I identified myself as an adult child of an alcoholic. Over time, I let that identity drop and still carried the sadness of my mother's alcoholism. Fast forward to about 10 or 15 years ago, after I'd gotten my social work training and gotten licensed as a licensed clinical social worker, I applied for and was hired as a family therapist and chaplain at a substance abuse treatment center. What I've come to understand was that early childhood experience, when I was a teenager, ended up becoming a strength for me, because as a family therapist, I knew firsthand what it felt like for families to experience the addiction of a loved one in their family. It gave me a particular view into how to work with and how to support families who had family members attending the residential treatment center that I was working at. So what happened was I first identified with the trauma, and then I overcame the trauma, and it became a strength. I became a victor instead of a victim in the situation. So why this is important is because we get to choose how we react and how we heal from adverse childhood experiences. I like to categorize trauma into two categories. There's capital T trauma, which everyone recognizes as a traumatic experience. Say you experienced a tornado tearing down your house. Everybody would agree that that would be traumatic. That's a capital T trauma, where the general public sees the event that you experienced as traumatic and maybe even life-threatening. But there's also lowercase t trauma, small t trauma, and that is a experience that overwhelms your current coping strategies. So lower T traumas are often unrecognized, and they're particularly happen with children, because children don't have the same coping strategies that adults have. So let me give you another example of a lower T trauma. So I had a client who told me about his fear of weather. And as we unpacked what that might be about, he told me a story of when he lived in the Midwest. I don't remember if it was Iowa or Nebraska, somewhere, maybe Kansas. And he was about 5 years old. There was a tornado warning, and he was the oldest of 3 children, and his father instructed him to look out the window toward the direction that the tornado would come from, and the rest of the family would go down in the basement where they were safe. And he was, at 5 years old, the lookout man or boy for whether a tornado was about to hit the house. His father obviously didn't think that was traumatic, that maybe he thought he was, growing him up to be a man or whatever. But what happened was it overwhelmed his coping strategies. So that small t trauma didn't appear to be traumatic on the outside, and his parents didn't recognize it as traumatic, but his coping strategies of being 5 years old and having that much responsibility for the safety of his family was overwhelming. And he spent years, until he came into my therapy practice, being afraid of weather. So there's an example of how even a small t trauma, one that's not easily recognized as overwhelming, can affect your life and create a long-term limit on your functioning. So when we experience an overwhelming event, then we can have the support to process that event, or oftentimes we go into silence and shame and don't share it. And it then becomes a part of our identity rather than something that we get over and we refine and get clearer about our life's purpose and what we're doing here. So traumatic events, particularly childhood events, can define you and restrict you, or you can work to overcome those events and live into your purpose. So let's talk a little bit about how health concerns can define you or refine you. So most of my life I've been a runner. I ran track and cross country in middle school and high school. And about 25 years ago, I started running again, and I became so short of breath after just about a block that I couldn't inhale. And it was really concerning. I'd never had that happen before. And so I went to the doctor. She ran a bunch of tests. She came in and sat down and said, well, we've run all of these tests and you've got asthma. So I looked at her, and she was a friend of mine. I said, what else do you have? I don't really want asthma. And she laughed and said, well, you've got all the classic signs of asthma. Here's a prescription for Singulair, which will reduce the frequency of asthma attacks. And here's a prescription for an inhaler, which will help reduce the severity of asthma attacks. And so I left the office. I thought about it quite a bit, and I did not even fulfill the Singulair prescription, but I did get an inhaler. And I started a running regimen where I would run until I was out of breath, take the inhaler, continue the run, and did that over several days. Each day I could run a little farther, and after about 3 weeks, I just ran through the shortness of breath and threw away the inhaler, which, by the way, on its label, on the big sheet that you take apart and read all the fine print, it says one of the alerts is may cause shortness of breath. Okay, you take it to relieve shortness of breath, but it may cause it. So after 3 weeks, I ran through my shortness of breath, threw away the inhaler, and have never had shortness of breath since. But if you look on my chart, it says I have asthma. I decided I didn't want that experience to constrict my life. I could have claimed and taken on the identity of someone with asthma for the rest of my life, and I'd still be using an inhaler and probably using Singular, and I didn't want that. I wanted to expand beyond that restriction that was a limited time restriction. And so I don't have asthma and I don't have shortness of breath. So one more category of how your life experiences can define you or they can refine you, and that is looking at relationships. All of us look for a relationship, and oftentimes the way we engage in a relationship is based on what we've learned or the patterns of thinking that we have in our head. And so oftentimes we run through the same pattern in relationship over and over and over again, which then tells us that there's a limitation in our mental health about how to be positively engaged in relationship. So what we can do with that is we can say, well, that's just who I am. You know, I'm angry. I'm an angry person. Or I don't like to be talked down to, or whatever life experiences have come to you over and over again that that don't feel good. So you can define yourself as that limitation, or you can refine yourself by saying, what is it about me getting angry that I need to work on? What can I do to maintain a positive relationship rather than just say, this is who I am, love it or leave it, which a lot of people do. So those relationship experiences that happen over and over again are patterns that you can break. And maybe it's not you, it's you're choosing who you're choosing to be in relationship with. You're choosing the same person over and over again, even though they have a different name, they still have that same way of relating that isn't a fit for you. And so it's refining either yourself or your choices in relationship. So that's the first of the 7 steps of finding your heart's song, is to live life and to live it in a way that the second step is to discern what helps me, what hurts me, what feels good, what doesn't feel good, and moving toward discerning who you are and how you can self-identify, or how you can choose your identity in a way that expands you rather than over time giving you more and more and more restriction. So today, thank you for listening. Today, I wish for you to take a look at your lived experiences and see if any of those have defined you in a limited way, because we can be defined in a expansive way as well. But look at the ones that you've allowed to seep into your identity, and are those restricted ways of identifying yourself serving you? And if not, look for ways to redefine your identity. To say, for example, I'm no longer the adult child of an alcoholic. I don't have any of those patterns of behavior anymore. I experienced that as a teenager, but I no longer am limited by that or allow that to restrict my functioning. So be well, and I'll see you hopefully in episode 18, where we'll continue to go through the steps for identifying your heart song. Today we looked at step 1, which is experience life, and step 2, which is to discern what feels right, what feels off, and move toward what feels right and what expands you into the created love that you were created to be. Be well.